Welcome, everyone. It's the Sit Down with Slick Vic. Got a very special guest today. My good buddy, Jeremiah Payne, software engineer at NASA. Jeremiah, thanks for coming on, man. I know you're a very busy man.
Oh, appreciate it.
Um, you know, Before I usually start getting into stuff, I like to kind of give a little background on my guests. I think we've had a couple of conversations about your background, but are you originally from Texas, or did you move from somewhere else?
Yeah, I was born in Boston and then came down to Houston in 1989.
Okay, East Coast, huh?
Yeah, my father and my mother are both from Baltimore, D.C. area. And then they went to
Okay.
college in Boston, met at church, started dating, and had children up there.
And what brought them down to Houston?
My dad's job. So he
Okay.
was he's also a software engineer.
Okay.
And at the time, he was working on compilers for a company called Intermetrics.
Okay.
And the language that they were supporting, Ada, was being used for the space shuttle.
Oh wow.
So, and lots of other networking simulations that are being used at Mission Control Center. So essentially what happened was Intermetrics had an office in Houston
Hmm.
where they were directly giving compiler updates and support to NASA, and he was brought down to be part of that support team.
Now, for those of us that aren't too familiar with the terminology, like compilers, are you referring to just kind of taking the information and what is really that going on right there?
Oh yeah. So the way like software generally works is you're going to write some set of words and or patterns, and then you take some rules for an according language, and then you translate the input from a human into a set of machine instructions.
Oh, okay.
And so there's lots of little details that have to go on underneath because a computer is, though it seems very advanced, it's like very basic. It's like you have to explain everything to a child,
Right.
except the child listens to you immaculately and doesn't forget anything.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah. So, and essentially, what he was working on was instructions for the space shuttle, right?
Yeah, well, for the language that's used. So
Oh.
the software engineers would at NASA were writing in the Ada, and then sometimes the compiler that would turn that software into the instructions needed for the computers that were running on the shuttle would need updates. So it's like, hey, I told the thing to make a left turn and it made a right turn. What's going on? It's like, oh yeah, we got that instruction wrong.
Right.
Let me fix it so that when you say do this, it actually does what you mean it to do.
Yeah, and that's important stuff, man. I mean, they're up there in space or going up to space. Like,
Mhm.
those calculations have to be pinpoint accurate, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you come down to Texas. So you because your dad, I guess he's working closer to NASA here in Houston. What was some of some of the hobbies you got involved with when you were younger?
So it's always kind of been just roundabout. Did a lot of different sports. So did baseball. In my neighborhood in the area, competitive swimming was a big deal.
Oh, okay.
So like a lot of the kids were on the swim team. I think our neighborhood has like around 1,000, 1,200 homes or so. And there were probably about 200 to 250 kids on the swim team each year. So that's a good majority of the neighborhood's children were involved in that team. So that also became like the social structure as well, as a lot of my lifetime friends were made on that swim team and during that process over the years.
And I know you guys can't tell, but you got that swimmer's body though. You're long. What are you, about 6'5" or something?
Nah, I'm only 6'1". My brother's the one who's 6'5". And
But I mean,
yeah,
you got the long arms, right?
yeah,
So you were doing pretty good, right? I'm assuming when you were younger.
yeah, I did well. Um, not quite like at the Excelsior level, but I did well.
Nice, nice.
So
So you were doing sports. I know that engineering is a lot of math, right? Was that something that you enjoyed, growing up? Were you a big math kid, science kid?
more of science than the math. The math is more conceptual for me versus if I don't have to solve it, I'm not going to. It's just one of those things. Can I get someone else to do the equation for me? And is an approximate good enough?
Right.
Not having to know calculus as much when I was younger. So, for example, like there were electrical projects that I like to work on. And as I'm doing the research for certain things, for example, like building a speaker, they have equations for how you calculate the inductance of a coil.
Right.
And I'm looking at, all right, well, can I just approximate how many wraparounds that I need for this? And that should give me close versus actually having to solve the exact, derivative of XYZ equation. It's like, nah, I don't want to do all that. Just
Take the quick approach, huh?
yeah, let me just get close enough, and then we'll practically figure things out from there. And then I'll take other measurements that are easier to tune things. So as long as I could get the general idea, then I was all about like tuning and refining afterwards versus trying to make everything exact from the beginning.
So was it ever the plan as a young child to eventually go? Because you essentially like followed your father's footsteps, right? He was a software engineer. You're a software engineer. Did you have other aspirations, or did you just not really know what you wanted to do when you grew up?
It was very much in not knowing what I wanted to do when I grew up. There was one big dream at first of just kind of being like a naval pilot. I love the Blue Angels, love Top Gun. I think I watched that movie like 200 times.
Oh, okay.
But there was when I started seeing like how tall I was getting and knowing those restrictions in terms
there's
of,
restrictions for that?
Yeah, they basically don't want you like over 6 feet for being a pilot.
Wow.
Like you can be, but
I guess it does make sense. The cockpits are pretty tight, right?
Yeah, they're pretty tight, and also like center of gravity, essentially, when you're pulling higher G's for men and being taller, that's just going to be even more stress. From what I understand.
Right, right. Have you ever flown anything, or have you ever been in a like one of those type of planes? Or
I have not been in a military jet, no. But I used to love the air show, and that was a thing every year in October.
Right.
Go watch the Blue Angels or Thunderbirds, etc.
So like in high school, like right when you're approaching graduation, like that's like, okay, what are you gonna do? Where are you gonna go? What's the plan? At that point, did you have an idea, or were you still kind of, well, let me just go to pick a college and then hopefully I'll figure it out then?
Plans had kind of shifted, but I still didn't know what the direction was. I'd gotten into doing video around my sophomore, junior year.
Oh, in high school. Okay.
And then I was also doing a lot of like the different electrical projects on the side. So that was an idea of maybe I want to do electrical engineering. I'd gotten into doing programming, and I was like, well, I like this. And I kind of like the concept of one of my favorite books, Ender's Game, with the computer facing off and training the main character. And I loved military strategy games and flight simulators. Those were like my two big games. And so I was like, okay, well, what if I learn more about computer science so I can write an AI that would be the back end for playing a game? Since no one else will make this game, I can just make the game myself.
Right.
And so then that became like okay, I think that's what I want to do. So I started looking at computer science programs, and specifically at universities that offered like some track with artificial intelligence.
AI has come a very, very long way, hasn't it?
Very much so.
What is your opinion on, is there a certain point where we're just going to be like, hey, this is turning into Terminator? Like at what point do we decide that, or is it, let's just keep on pushing? Like what is your opinion on what should we use AI for, and is there a point of no return?
I think that's always been a discussion as computers have developed. One of the very first stories that I read that predates like the concept of Terminator is Colossus.
Okay.
And that was where a supercomputer AI was linked in with the nuclear infrastructure during the height of the Cold War.
Is this like a book or what?
It was a book, and they even made a movie of it. I think the book was originally written in like the early '60s.
Okay.
So computers were still very much vacuum tubes and large rooms and that type of thing, right? Essentially, the Russians were doing the same thing, and the two AIs kind of opposed each other and started exchanging mathematic calculations as a way of testing each other's intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, they get to a point where they agree the humans are the problem.
Right.
And so there's always this thing of we as humans, we know that we are not doing things to the best of our ability.
Right.
And so if you were to look at things without emotion and logically, then the logical answer is fix the humans.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the inherent fear comes in, is our own insecurity of what happens if we give something the ability and the power to look at us as we really are. Would we pass that morality test? And I don't think that most people would, agree like, hey, yeah, the species is worth moving forward if you could just say, no, get rid of the humans.
Right.
Oh, you're destroying the planet? Get rid of the humans. Oh, you're destroying each other? Get rid of the humans.
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously that's a huge thing to think about, but at the same time, another thing is now you got the fusion of of AI with, well, not AI, the fusion of just like cyborg technology, right? Where we could actually take computers and electronics and fuse them with humans. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of Elon Musk, right? What is it? Neuralink?
Yep, Neuralink.
Which essentially is his whole thing was bandwidth, right? Like humans can't even though you have your cell phone that can Google something, but what if you didn't have to do that? What if it was just directly into you, and you can kind of like the Matrix, basically, right? When they just hook up and you learn jujitsu like in 2 seconds. What do you think about that? I mean, now you kind of get into like ethical stuff, right? Like, should we be even doing that, or like what? Because I've always felt like that was inevitable, right? I remember watching a documentary and this was like early 2000s, where someone had lost vision in one of their eyes, and they had like a camera they had like these glasses that had a camera on it, and that connected to their brain, and they were able to see, but it was very, very basic, right? It was like black and white, but still they could still see what things around them, obviously it was very elementary technology. Now I'm sure it's basically they can probably see, so.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's going to lead to problems? I mean, when you talk about fusing humans and machine.
You're right. There is the ethical changes. There's the catalyst, which is usually repair, right?
Right.
Being able to help the quality of life for someone. I know, like with Neuralink, Elon has mentioned that he wants to be able to restore motion for people who have nerve damage, right? And so that's why they've been doing things like studying the motion of pigs and being able to use the Neuralink that's implanted into a pig to predict what the brain is trying to get the legs to do while it's walking.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can then take, okay, this is what motion is being fed into Neuralink, and then how can we augment that to like actually restore that real motion? So, there's good in that.
Right.
And then you start moving into, okay, now that we've gotten that part done, and we start enhancing, and then you can buy enhancements and
superhumans.
Now you've got exactly the superhumans or the super soldiers or augmented soldiers or augmented assassins. I'm thinking of what's that? Not Black Mirror, Altered Carbon. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I mean, do you feel like? I mean, obviously, the United States, we're tend to be a little bit more on the cautious side, because we still can vote on laws, and our society has a lot of influence on lawmakers and whatnot. But when you look at countries like China, where their government is calling the shots. They don't really care what the people think. They can just kind of just, there's no limits. There's no barriers, right? They're going to just do whatever they want.
I don't. I think even with the example with China, like the government itself is still relatively conservative and hard limited. For example, like you had a doctor that took it upon himself to essentially manipulate some DNA of a fetus.
Okay.
To try to make like an HIV DNA based vaccine, like if that makes sense. Like,
okay.
So the baby would not be able to contract HIV,
Okay.
and government came down on him
Really
extremely hard.
Okay.
I remember reading about it a bit on Ars Technica, which is like my favorite general tech website. They just have lots of different
How do you say it?
Ars Technica. So
Ars.
it's like AAR or ARSTECHINA.
Okay. I have to check that out.
Yeah, it's a fun conglomeration of just different combinations of technology and its implementation in culture. So everything from cars to AI, different laws that are affecting whether it's copyright or technology and things like that.
Yeah, I'm victim to it. You definitely got to be careful. Where you get your information from, and I guess there's always just been this stereotype or just this perception of China, just being this like evil country. But as I've done a little bit more research, like you said, like when you tell me something like that, it definitely goes against what people believe China is doing or what they would want to do, right? If they're against something like that, then they would probably not be for doing other crazier things. I mean, because if you think about it, creating a person that is immune to HIV, that you would think that's a good thing, or you would think that that's not pushing the envelope that much. So what do you think they would say if he created like a super soldier that's like going to be 6'5" and run a 4.240 or something? Just all these crazy attributes. If they're against this, it would probably make sense that they're not really pushing. Yeah, because you're right. I mean, they do tend to be a little bit conservative as well. They're not savages, right? They have morals and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's definitely one of those things where I shouldn't just go ahead and assume that they're going to do this, they're going to do that. Maybe I should check out your website and really get information before I just make assumptions.
Well, I mean, there's also the, how does varying culture look at where are the ethical boundaries of what you're trying to do in progression, right? And I think it kind of ties back into what you were mentioning before of, here we're looking at the people to kind of guide the government in terms of forcing the government's hand as to where we stand or what we think should be progressive, right?
Right.
And then on the other side, where you were saying, like, with the government in China being more of, okay, look, this is what we're going to do.
Exactly.
and this is exactly how we're moving forward. It's still, based off of what I think the culture, though.
No, true. Yeah.
Is going to decide for itself. Because even in the two, we're still very different from like a European centric culture, right? Like there's such a blend of, hey, this is exactly what we want. And the government's like, no. And then the people are like, no, do it. Like, okay.
Yeah, you're right. No, it all comes down to culture when you break it down. Because even when you say like, oh, well, the government has, they exercise so much power. Well, the government still consists of people, right? And so the people have culture, so it's still, like I said, it comes down to the culture. So you mentioned you got into videography when you were in high school. What kind of drew you into that? Was it just more of the technical aspect of it, or are you a big like film guy? What was the whole draw behind getting into being behind the camera?
It was kind of both. And then it was also around the time when prosumer digital video was starting to become more accessible.
Okay.
In the 90s, you still had the birth of nonlinear editing becoming more of a staple at the high end. For example, like an Avid Symphony editing system would cost like $100,000.
Right.
Or the DaVinci coloring system would be like $150,000, like per license, right? But then you had Apple introduce Final Cut Pro for $1,000. And the original Final Cut was based off of another system. They kind of went through a couple different companies before it ended up at Apple. And Apple was like, I think we could do like this video thing. So for a few years, Apple kind of concentrated on doing more professional video. And at that time was just kind of me following along with different toys, essentially, like in the tech industry, and like hard drives were starting to become bigger. I remember like the first hard drive I bought for video editing was 80 gigabytes, and it cost me $300. And I was like, woohoo!
Yeah.
So much space.
Right. Nowadays, that's nothing. Like one shoot, maybe. Depending if you're shooting on 4K, then
Yeah,
it's not even going to be enough.
4K will just eat right through that. I did a video project for wonderful musician in Houston named Babushka.
Mm-hmm.
And when we shot her visual EP in 2016, we did 5 music videos in 4 days. And across that shooting in 4K, we shot about 4 terabytes.
Wow.
In a matter of those 4 days. It was literally like a terabyte a day.
It's a lot of memory cards.
Yeah. the memory cards were only 128 gigabytes. So what ended up happening was that was good enough for 14 minutes of footage. And I had 4 of them. And I had one of my really good friends, Desmond, with my laptop and an 8 terabyte hard drive hooked up and the memory card reader. And so the cards were
come out,
numbered, and
transfer.
I give it to him. He would give me the next card. I put it in the camera, and we just kept that rotation going. And the most adrenaline pumping moment was when I had to hit that format button on the camera.
Oh, yeah.
Please tell me you have saved every little bit of this footage before I delete the camera.
Yeah, because then it's gone forever.
And especially with us just rotating through, there wasn't going to be a chance to recover any footage because we were filling those cards right back up again and then putting them back into rotation. So
basically you came in at like the cusp of this revolution, right? Because I mean, like you said, things were not, I mean, nowadays, I mean, if you think about it, you know, what the phone can do, right? The phone, with the phone, you can do so many things. You could shoot stuff with it. The quality, you can shoot in 4K. But like you said, you know, in the 90s, you know, you're spending $100K for a license for the software to even. So obviously, unless you're just, you know, balling out of control, that's not even an option for you, right? You're not thinking about doing that. So you came in, and you know, when you were young, and here comes this new accessibility to software thanks to Apple. I never realized that it was Apple that really, you know, kind of helped everybody out by introducing this. You know, I remember, I mean, I knew about Final Cut, but I didn't think that it was kind of the, you know, the stepping stone. And because I'm assuming once they came in with, you know, $1,000 software, I mean, they kind of cornered the market for people to be able to, you know, that didn't have a lot of money. And then that's when all these other companies had to step in and go, wow, well, then if they're going to charge $1,000, we should come down and match that to compete, right?
Yeah, it did change the landscape a bit. You had Adobe Premiere.
Right.
At the time, Premiere, the early versions of Premiere were very, very bad. It was just beyond super buggy, and just the interface was ugly and everything else. So in comparison, Final Cut versus Premiere, Final Cut was a step ahead, and Final Cut started introducing more Apple started doing more acquisitions and bringing that into the Final Cut suite. So it started with just a single piece of software, and then that Final Cut suite that you got for $1,000 started including things like a cinema conform tool for doing frame scanning from film into digital.
Oh, wow.
And helping people out. So if you were doing like an indie film, you were shooting on 16 millimeter, and that telesyn process of getting your 16 millimeter film into a digital editing system was now basically included. All you had to do was just go to get the hardware, rent the hardware to run your film through, and you could do that all within Final Cut and have everything frame matched and stuff like that. So that started making, like you said, Sony and their suites come down, or producing consumer versions of their high-end suites. And then Blackmagic came in, and they really took that Apple model of, let's buy something expensive and then make it either $1,000 or free. And now you can get Blackmagic Studio Resolve for literally free. And if you want to pay for their studio version, it's $300. Final Cut Pro is down to $300 or $200, something like that, on the App Store. And it's a completely different mind frame now. Or even, like I said, like with phones and iMovie.
Yeah.
Or TikTok, you can do green screen effects on your phone in real time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I remember the first time I shot a blue screen, it took 2 days to render.
Oh, wow.
the 5-minute segment. We just took like our campus news people and put them in Paris for a Valentine's Day special, and that computer was just pegged at 100% for 2 days straight.
So you start getting involved with the videography. What is it that you were doing? Were you just doing everything? Were you writing short films? Were you just doing videos? Like, what were you just playing around? How did you kind of start off with it?
So it started with like the regular home movies for holiday type things, right?
Right.
My father had just gotten a new camera. He used to have a video camera from when we were young, recorded everything, first Christmas, birthdays, things like that. And then eventually like that camera broke, and he got a new camera right around the same time, like my sophomore year in high school. And so somewhere like between having the camera and seeing like the little in-camera effects that you could do at the time, and then hearing about like iMovie, and I'm like, okay, what is this iMovie thing? And they have a Final Cut that's just even more powerful than iMovie.
Right.
So the theater department at my high school had a copy of Final Cut Pro, and I was able to utilize that on some of the computers in school. And so it was like, as I started like seeing like what you could do, then it became, how could I apply this to something else? And the next, my senior year in high school, the English teacher, Mr. Vanderzil, allowed us to do our reports as video projects.
Oh, nice.
So we had to do like, these group presentation things or whatever. And so basically we would, take a tale of two cities and, all right, I'm going to do a video project to show you that I read this story. Or various other things we had to do. I think for like the theater class that I was taking, we all had to create videos that were like a parody video. Mm-hmm. And at the time, 9/11 had just happened earlier in the year. And there was the anthrax.
Oh, the anthrax
scares that were coming in the mail after that. And The Phantom Menace, the first of the Star Wars prequels, had just come out as well. And so for my parody video, we decided to do a Duel of the Fates with the Jedi fighting Darth Maul. And the Darth Maul was essentially Osama bin Laden.
Oh, wow.
And the Jedi were the president and vice president at the time. And so it was supposed to be just, like this Jedi fight to represent like the response and the war on terror and everything with the airstrikes that was going on. So we actually grabbed some footage from some of like the military tapes that were out at the time and dropped that in as footage in between, like with the lightsaber strikes.
Okay.
Tried to reproduce like the Matrix bullet time.
Oh, wow.
So, with bullet time, they actually had multiple cameras strung up, and then they all were sequenced to do their shots to create like that wraparound effect with Neo bending back. And I decided, well, if we shoot against a black sky, it'll work close to a dark background that I can work on rotoscoping out. And there's like the little merry-go-round at the park, because we did this whole fight scene at my neighborhood park.
Right.
We had them jump up onto the merry-go-round and hold the pose, and then somebody off camera rotated the merry-go-round so that they rotated, and then I just lifted the camera up and down to create like that bullet time effect, and then they continued the fight. So then we just rotoscoped all that, in post with Final Cut.
Must have come out pretty good.
Well,
well, I mean, the idea, the concept sounds good, right?
Yeah, we got an A. The quality of the camera I was shooting with at the time, though, was, it was trash. But it was just, because like I said, it was my dad's like VHS camcorder that he got from the time. And we were running that through a digital converter to get that into Final Cut. But those are the kind of projects that I started with. And when I got to college and being at an HBCU at Prairie View, I was very new to step shows and fraternities and things like that. So all the different talent shows and stuff, when I found that there were people who had like their own handy cams and were showing up, I would just be like, hey, can you film this and just give me a copy of the tape after you're done? And so I would do that and edit like a building talent show or one of the step shows and make like a full production from it. And then I would sell the production on VHS tapes.
Oh, nice.
So I was like, oh, hey, you want a copy of the thing? Here you go. And then it's like, okay, well, now we need to move up to DVDs because there was that transition period. Like people were starting to have more access to DVDs. I think maybe by like my sophomore year. So then I started doing DVD production of the same things, go to a step show, go to a probate, get some copy of the footage, and then sell it. And for specific fraternities, I'd make one just for them. So I would like re-edit it so that like it had like their fraternity letters like on the cover, or maybe like a special animated intro or something like that, and sell that for $20, $25.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely good in your hustle on. I mean, I was never that big into it at the time. I've done a little video stuff last couple of years, but things are obviously a lot easier nowadays. I remember back in high school, my big hustle was creating CDs. Like, Napster had just came out, or I remember when Eminem's Marshall Mathers LP came out. I went and got it from the store. I had a CD burner. I burnt like 50 copies. Went to school. Hey, I got it for $5. What's up? Or I think it was even 10. But I mean, if you think about it, I mean, nowadays, I mean, people can just like download anything, or you can throw it up on YouTube, or now everything is on demand.
Yes. Even it would have been completely different if YouTube was around at the time. And actually, I take it back. YouTube had just started coming out, which I started transitioning to. By the time when I got into a fraternity and then had my first group come in under me, and I was the DP, I actually put their probate video up on YouTube, and that got something like 30,000 views back then.
that was early 2000s, right? Or
2006.
Okay, mid.
Yeah.
YouTube, has their concept always been the same? Just upload whatever, or did they have something else going on even in the beginning? Or
no, it's Google has done a pretty good job of leaving YouTube the way it was. Like, when YouTube started, it was one of those break-even things where they barely had enough money to sustain the growth that they had. And they were trying to figure out like an ad model and stuff like that. And so you didn't quite have content creators being able to support themselves off of YouTube alone. But then Google stepped in, bought them, kind of kept it the same, but was able to kind of emphasize that back end ad model
Mm-hmm.
better. And then you kind of had like that growth kind of spike up where everyone was able to, at different tiers, start to make a little bit more from the AdSense of what you get on YouTube. And until you had, what was his name? Was it Logan Paul or was it PewDiePie? It was one of the big YouTubers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up having like something that was controversial, and Mercedes-Benz ad showed up during the controversial post.
Mm-hmm.
And Mercedes-Benz caught so much flack for it that they were like, hey, look, no, we have to withdraw. And so there was a big withdrawal from some major companies from the AdSense model until things were redefined. And so that kind of hurt like the YouTube content community for a little bit. But I think they're starting to recover a bit. Like they have better guidelines as to how they do monetization. And so that allows for, the content creators to kind of say, okay, look, I know that I want this video to make money. So I need to leave these certain things out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, it was a relatively new, concept. So you got to kind of adjust on the fly, if you're YouTube. I mean, that's just how technology is in general, right? Like, it's always adjusting because it evolves so fast. It evolves a lot faster than we do, a lot faster than the laws do. So there's constant changes, tweaking of what it is, quote unquote, allowed or what is PC. There's always got to be a little. There's always going to be that way, right? It's as long as, unless we go into full like anarchy mode, there's always going to be a new rule or something you can or can't do.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by The Ranch Houston, comprised of Ashe Yoga and Wellness, The Garden Project, and The Mill HTX, is an intentional, conscious organization created for adults to connect to an inclusive community through art, food, nature exploration, and movement, and for school-age children to empower themselves through education on sustainability and edible gardening. It is run by Tamika Caston-Miller and Lenny Caston-Miller. Highly recommend it. Y'all go get your stretch on, get your garden on, and just go out there and meet some good people and have a great time. We are also brought to you by Apparel Up, the leading custom apparel provider in Houston, Texas. They help customers represent their brand correctly with high-quality, long-lasting custom apparel. Whether you're in need of embroidered scrubs for your medical practice, embroidered polos for your nationwide enterprise, or screen-printed shirts for your sports team, they got you covered. They are dedicated to providing you the highest quality of screen printing and embroidery service, run by the very talented Jennifer Franco. Get your embroidery on from Apparel Up.
So you have this love for videography, for technology. You mentioned you were doing coding. So you're at Prairie View. At what point did you realize that, okay, I think I should do, engineering, software engineering to be specific? Because I'm sure, the love that you have for videography, I can kind of tell just how you talk about it, how much, you enjoy doing it. Was there ever a thought of like, hey, I want to be Spike Jonze, I want to be Spielberg? Like, did that ever cross your mind, or what was kind of like your thought process when you really had to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do?
So when I did get to Prairie View, I was debating on double majoring between communications with the video emphasis and computer science. And I knew that I wanted to do computer science at a basic just because I wanted to do AI. I was really heavy on that AI stuff at the beginning. So I used to, as a freshman, go to the grad classes in AI and just basically sit in and audit the class.
Oh, nice.
And take home the assignments and work on that. As my freshman year, I'd spend all my after hours essentially either doing homework, or doing research, or going to parties. It was like, okay, I've got to ride with someone, and because I didn't have a car, so it was like, okay, what time are you leaving? 11 o'clock? All right, let me get everything in by 11, and then I'm going to jump in the car, go to the party, and I probably went to like 100 some parties like in the first semester.
Wow. every day, huh?
Pretty much. Prairie View had a quite a few number of parties that were legendary and epic. Fun times. But when I got into maybe like I want to say my sophomore year, and the project that I was putting into play for AI was really starting to take place or to evolve and like really become something to move forward with, then it was like, okay, I need to actually focus on something. And I didn't want to try to double major. And I was looking at the time in terms of conflicting schedules. And I was like, oh, okay, it'll take me 6 years to graduate versus maybe just 4.5 if I stick with computer science. Not knowing that it would end up taking me 6 years to graduate anyway because of one particular class that I had to take multiple times.
Which class was that?
Linear algebra.
Oh, yeah.
And linear algebra, actually, I'd say one class. It was actually, there were two classes. Analysis of algorithms and linear algebra. Analysis of algorithms, it was really just the structure of that particular professor in the class. I would always end up failing his final. Took it at University of Houston Clear Lake and passed with an A+. Like, it was just,
sometimes it's those damn professors, man. They just, they either, it's weird. That's one thing I always found weird about college is like the professor has so much power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which could be a good thing because some of them are like, look, it all comes down to the final. Like it doesn't matter. None of these assignments really matter. You either pass or you don't pass because of the final. And then you got other professors that put weight on everything equally, or they have it broken down by percentages. So, oh, you do better on this test. Oh, you're fine. We'll just count this one as double. Like there's so many, and anything in between, So, yeah, I mean, I had the same issue, where I had a professor who put all the weight on the final. You don't show up, you don't have your best day, and then that's it, done. Yeah, I completely agree. But like you said, you went and took it at U of H and got an A+. So obviously, you knew the material.
Yeah, and they actually went through different algorithms that we didn't cover at Prairie View, and so some of those algorithms were a little bit more complex, and I did better with that than just the way that we had to implement. So I'm partially dyslexic, right?
Okay.
And so what ends up happening is that I first found out that it could affect my education when I took a math class called discrete mathematics. And in discrete mathematics, it's primarily like just different sequences. Like most people know like the Fibonacci sequence, and there's lots of different numeric sequences that are similar to that. And when you go through and you're calculating, and you get to like 50 places in, if you look at the numbers backwards, that'd mess up your calculation.
Right.
And so I wouldn't realize that I had inversely, changed something up until I get to the end. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't quite look right. But then you have to go back and double check through the steps. So same thing with linear algebra and analysis of algorithms. We weren't allowed to use calculators. And as you're going through and plugging stuff in, if I wrote the numbers backwards, instead of writing 12, I wrote 21. Wouldn't think of it. And then I'm looking at, okay, what's the next step? 21 times 4 is very different than 12 times 4.
Right.
And it was just, it would always catch me at the exams. And discrete math, that professor was like, hey, if you're doing this for programming and you say you know this, you can do these assignments and program them. And I'll take that as you doing the homework. And I was like, yeah, because I'm actually doing this in I was writing a video game. So
right.
The video game uses linear algebra. That's how you get like the 3-dimensional spaces, and that's how you calculate things like specularity of a light bouncing off of materials, and you get the shininess and special effects and all of that. So I knew the linear algebra required to do that. I just couldn't write it down, during the test. So with discrete math, I was like, okay, wrote all the code. Here's your answer. Here's how you get this particular sequence. Here's the actual software that or source code that's used to create this. Here's the results, and it prints it all out. And she was like, all right, yeah, you can pass the class.
Now video games. That's something that's evolved to a whole entire new level. I remember playing Atari and Nintendo. but like my favorite thing to do, I remember in elementary, was Doom Deathmatch. I had the luxury of a down the street neighbor, his dad. I don't recall exactly what he did, but they had two computers at his house, which is just crazy, you know, in the early '90s. And you know, it was like a 486 and a 586, you know. And you know, they were right next to each other. You just took the monitors, you tilted them till you know you couldn't see the other guy's screen, and we would play Doom Deathmatch for hours. It was the greatest thing ever. Now, what we have is, and I always wondered when it would happen because I remember watching like Lawnmower Man, and you know, had the virtual reality thing. But now it finally, I don't know if the technology just wasn't there. Maybe the processing speed wasn't there for like really good virtual reality. But now they're doing some pretty crazy things with it. Have you ever done that, the virtual reality stuff? Not like design it yourself, but like actually used it?
I haven't used anything in recent years.
Okay.
So I've been keeping up with the progression of the tech. So for example, like Oculus, et cetera. So I know a lot of like the back end concerns that are being done to get rid of the older issues like dizziness and et cetera, like the disorientation that would happen. And so different things like that are essentially being able to replicate a 4K monitor on your eyeglasses at close to like 120 hertz.
Wow.
So it's just that level of power required to compute that amount of information and rasterize all that data. Yeah, it's taking a lot more on the back end to be able to take what we're used to seeing now and then putting that into a more VR capable realm, if that makes sense. Like you get used to seeing something on a TV, your brain dissociates a little bit. It's one of those things like when you look at TV versus film, just the difference in frame rate. With film at 24 frames per second and TV typically being at 30 frames per second, sports at 60, you're so used to already conditioned in associating those frame rates that your brain recognizes that as its reality. So when you see something that's supposed to be a movie and it's not shot at 24 frames per second, you're like, yeah, I don't know if this is film quality, right?
Right.
Your brain automatically does that. So then when you start doing VR and you're looking at particular frame rates and particular sets of quality, you're trying to convince the brain that this is, you know, a new standard to judge something by. And your brain's like, I don't know if I like this frame rate. I don't know if I like this amount of detail. And so it's like trying to get like these things to, we're moving into a new realm. And so the consumers themselves also have to establish what is comfortable, what feels right, what feels like VR, you know?
Yeah. Is that, because I know, I mean, obviously, right, every couple of years you have 4K, 8K, like it's just, you know, exponentially growing. Is that where you think we're going to go to where, I mean, obviously it's always going to keep getting better and better, but do they want to go to the direction of just having this screen, or do they really want to go to actually putting on the glasses and actually being in the environment? Where do you think the main focus is, or is it just both?
I think it's a combination of both. You have some people who are, you know, in areas that are really trying to focus on that quality of experience when you are doing something and putting on the glasses and going into an environment. And then there's other experiences that you can set up for existing on the screen. And I think Microsoft was working on an augmented variation where it projects image around your living room based off of something to basically expand your screen.
Right.
So there's lots of
almost like Minority Report, right? You remember?
Yes. So like where you have like the projected holographic like interfaces and everything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that would be that'd be really cool. Like holograms, you know, like I always wondered, I remember I think I was playing at Funplex, the arcade, and they had this video game where it was a hologram that would come up and you would see it. You didn't really, it was kind of weird because the hologram was an actual person, and it was kind of hard for you to like control them in real time, but I mean, they were trying. It was a long time ago. I figured by now that technology would have increased and the control of it would have gotten a lot better. I know you got like keyboards, right? Hologram keyboards. It projects on the table and you can sit there and use it like that. So, yeah, that's very interesting. I definitely think that's going to be something in the future, right? I mean, you said Microsoft's already working on it, and that kind of eliminates the setup of having this big giant screen and moving stuff out the way. If it's just all projected, right, it's going to be a lot easier to maneuver and to work with. So you decide that you want to go into the software engineering, that's what computer science major, that's what you want to do, and you graduate from Prairie View. Where was your next step after that? Where did that lead you?
Honestly, NASA started while I was still at Prairie View.
Oh, okay. You interned there or something?
It was almost like a co-op type program they had set up. So with government contracts, there's a certain percentage that they want allocated for major contracts to small minority disadvantaged businesses.
Okay.
So that can be a business that is owned by a woman, by a veteran, by someone of color, right? And there's also a percentage that needs to go towards education. And there's like another percentage that needs to go towards like, I forgot what the third category is. Essentially, what they did was they set up a program at my university called the Storefront. And the idea that was proposed with the Storefront by a woman named Nancy Pelosi was, or not Nancy Pelosi, that's the Speaker. Oh, what's her name now? It was Nancy and it started with the P, and I went straight to Pelosi. Oh gosh, it's been so many years. Nancy, please don't be mad at me if you hear this. But it was Nancy and Diane Magliola who interviewed me, and what they'd set up was an office on campus that hired students to essentially do a lot of the work that you didn't want to pay an engineer full time to do.
Oh, okay.
So it was still work that needed to be done, but if you could have the engineers doing higher and priority items, and then let some of the bugs that need to be taken off the list accounted for by young upcoming engineers, that allowed them to still get work done. It was operated by a woman-owned business. And so that was like the way it worked was as a subcontractor to the main contractor. The main contractor at the time was Lockheed Martin, and the subcontractor was Cimarron. And so I got hired by Cimarron as a junior, and along with other students, it was maybe roughly about 20 students. We had like 2 managers that were full-time, and we would work about 20 hours a week. And so you got paid, co-op, intern level salary at the time. But for a software engineer, that was almost like the equivalent of being like a full-time job at, any place paying minimum wage. Right. So it worked out really good for us to only have to work 20 hours during a school week and still get paid like $14, $15 an hour.
Yeah.
So that was how I started. And essentially what ends up happening is, because we've already gone through all the work to be set up into the accounts, we have like all the IT access that we need to do the work that we're doing. When it became time to graduate, they would offer a job for most of the people who were working Storefront, and just basically say, hey, look, you can just keep doing the same thing, maybe still support the team that you're already supporting, or move over and supporting another team. So there was probably like around a dozen people who did take the job working for NASA during the course of like that program. Lots of other people were able to use that same experience and outcompete, people from all over the country at different places. Like, you got students coming out of MIT, and it's like, all right, cool, you're coming out of MIT. What experience do you have? All right. You're coming from Prairie View. I'm not familiar with Prairie View. What experience do you have? I've been working this many months continuously on this level of software that decodes stuff for the space shuttle. Oh, yeah. Come over here.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things where, people don't tell you, right, when you're when you're younger in high school trying to figure things out, or even in college, that, and especially in high school when everyone's pushing for, especially in Texas, right? UT, Rice, these very expensive schools, especially like a school like Rice. When in reality, that's not what makes the difference. The difference is you can be going to a smaller school like Prairie View, but if you get that experience in when you graduate, that makes or breaks the deal.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, you're out bidding guys from MIT because you have that experience. You've already done it. Who cares where you graduated from? You already know the work.
Exactly.
And that's what actually matters.
Exactly. It was a great feed through process. For me specifically, there was a rough gap only because of an issue I had with the dean at Prairie View for computer science. We had kind of gotten into it, and he was like, "Well, I don't think you're actually going to graduate this semester."
Wow.
And he went and signed my paperwork.
That's terrible.
So the next semester, he got replaced as the dean.
So you were supposed to graduate?
I was supposed to
and
graduate.
He prevented you from
He
doing
prevented me from graduating.
Wow.
And so I was...
What an asshole.
I had more words than that, but it was one of those things where they, from a contract perspective, they didn't want me to leave. Mm-hmm. So they were like, well, you can work 40 hours, a week, but we can't bring you on as full-time yet. So it didn't have benefits, wasn't getting paid like an actual salary. Right. And they were like, well, we can try to, fit things in if we just don't want you to go anywhere. And it was like, working for space, it was something that I wanted to do because I'm also like a space enthusiast,
right.
And just a byproduct of always loving planes and rockets and everything like that growing up. So it's like, all right, well, I guess I can stick around. But I had to wait to graduate in the following semester because the very first week they replaced the dean, the new guy was like, why didn't he sign this paperwork? You got everything complete. Here, just get out of my office, go. And it was like one of those relieving moments that was so upsetting at the same time. It was like relief that, okay, now I just have to wait till the end of the semester. But upsetting of, this took this man less than 2 minutes to look through my data, see that I was supposed to be graduating and sign the paperwork. And this other guy just gave me so much crap.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was an obvious personal thing, right? Like he, for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe you keyed his car. I don't know. I'm just kidding.
I didn't go to class. That was my notoriety. I was notorious for not going to classes. I would show up on exam day, or sometimes for different classes, the professors would put their notes out ahead of time, like the PowerPoint of what they were going to be going through in terms of a lecture. And I would read that ahead of time since they're sending it out.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I really only don't understand this item. So I'll come into the class maybe 20, 30 minutes late, wait for them to get to the part that I didn't understand, ask my question, and then leave. And it was like...
And then that kind of goes back to like what I was saying earlier. Some professors are cool with that, and some are not. Yeah. I mean, you get some professors that are like, look, I need you in here every time, and if you're absent this amount of days, I'm going to drop you. And I had one guy wouldn't even let us open the laptop. No laptops open. I was like, what the hell? Why? Some people like to type their notes.
Yes. Yeah.
But with this guy, not an option. You had to write your notes. And he was like, look, everything you need, I'm putting it up on the screen. You don't need your screen. And I was like, man, what a dick. Like, what does it even matter? Like, but it's good to have those. And then you have the other professors who are like, look, I don't care what you do. I'm going to post everything I'm going to talk about in class. So technically, I guess you don't have to come if you understand the material. Just come on test day. And, you got to love those guys.
Yeah, the ones who were like, just come on test day, I did better in their classes anyway. The ones that didn't like me doing that, those are the ones I usually scored lower in. And I was like, okay, so is it a matter of my actual performance or you having a personal vendetta of the fact that I don't need to be in the class to understand what's going on? Because unlike other students, I was personally invested in development of computer science. So I would go home and then research and work in the field. Like me hanging out was sitting at my computer and programming and working on a project. My senior design project was the equivalent of like 4 or 5 of them combined into one.
Right.
And I did all the coding for that particular project. Even though it was a group project, I'm the one who actually did all the implementation.
Oh, you're like the favorite team member.
But it worked out great because like our senior design project wasn't just, okay, can you program something? It was to take an idea, go through the full software development process of taking that idea and structuring it out into sets of requirements and design documents and testing procedures and test results. And so I needed help doing all of that in addition to the actual implementation. And so we would work on some of the design together and sketch things out. And then based off of that, it was like, okay, now make this design actually build what we said we wanted it to build. And while I was doing that is when we still had to come up with all the rest of that documentation. Like I think like the final presentation was something like 150 pages.
Wow.
And I didn't type all of that.
Yeah. Well, you had other important things to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was making the stuff, but
Right.
there's no way I could have typed all of that. So the 2 people that I was teamed up with, Forrest and Heather, like they did a lot of work because, like I said, just the general scope that we were doing was like 4 or 5 senior design projects in one.
Right.
And so they were having to keep up with all of that extra work just to fully present like the idea.
So without getting into things that you, I don't know, you might have to, you sign a confidentiality agreement, or you know stuff that I shouldn't know, or obviously the world. Like what exactly do you do there at NASA?
Oh yeah. So when I first started, I was doing what we call like a binary conversion. There's different file formats for data streams, and there were tools that were used to parse those data streams.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, they were command line tools, but they were written in Java. And Java does have a graphical interface section. And so what I did was I made it so that you could take these interpreters of these 3 different file formats that were coming down, and you could combine them, get the output, and print them out on a regular printer, and you didn't have to open everything in the command line. It was like a graphical thing with tabs, and you could switch and select which button you needed to interpret which particular file and that type of stuff. So that was like the first project that I worked on. It was really just kind of creating like an interface for an existing tool. Then other things kind of became like writing manuals for tools that existed. From there, it was doing bug fixes for, we have a group called the command system. And so that actually is what they use to send commands to the space station as well as to the space shuttle. At the time, those were the 2 vehicles that were supported. And so you had like the actual back-end server and then all of the front-end displays that were used by the applications or the users. And so the users, they click on a button or they want to do this. And the first feature that I got to support was adding Flash as a memory type that you could store a command on for the space station.
Oh, wow.
So it was like they had like you could do something like on the hard drive, you could write a command to memory, and they were including the ability to add like a flash drive. And so we had to actually create like, just because everything is so specific, we had to create steps in the software to be able to say, hey, you can actually write this command to a flash drive.
So you're like part of the like the unsung hero team, right? Like when people think of space, what do they think about? Oh, I want to be an astronaut. Or the astronaut. They're the ones that are national heroes, But none of what they do would be possible without people like you. You're like you're doing the base, the foundation of whether it's working on the shuttle or the space station. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are essential. Things aren't going to get done if those aren't, good to go. Do you ever care that this guy who's using things that you designed or you helped implement that nobody. I mean, that you don't get any attention, or you're just you don't care. You're having a good time doing it.
Oh no, I mean I love it just because anytime you see a shot of, especially after the work I've been doing over the last few years with the redesigned Mission Control Center, anytime you see a picture of somebody in Mission Control using something, you're literally looking at my software.
Oh wow!
Because my system runs in the back end for everything for Mission Control at the moment with the security system. And it's integrated into all the applications. So all the data flows that go through Mission Control, and the encryption, the authentication checks, the authorization checks, all of that stuff has to go through software that I built, designed, and tested. And that's been like one of those cool things, because at first I didn't want to do that.
Right.
Like the security, when I got assigned to security, I was like, I don't want to do this. But then it became a cool challenge. And working with like my teammates like Elias and Dat and Mike and Glenn and David, like the group, we had to figure out all these different solutions to problems where you couldn't just Google it. Like there was nobody else. Like, these were things where there's nobody else doing some of the things that we were doing, and even some of the industry standard stuff we were utilizing in different ways because we had a different requirement for how we were approaching implementing our security. And so we had to take a theory and then turn it into our own working practice. And so I have nothing but pride whenever when I see a shot of Mission Control, I'm like, that's my stuff right there. Like,
and Google, Google's awesome. Calculators are awesome, but I feel like that has kind of debilitated people in a way, kind of made them lazy. Calculator is nice because it does the work, but you should be able to do the work, right? Google's nice because it can give you information rather quickly. But I mean, I remember pre-Google, when you had encyclopedias, or there were ways for you to obtain this knowledge. You had to do some research. And that kind of gave you discipline, structure, especially doing math without calculators, like all the steps and all the calculations, I remember being young and doing these things called Mad Minutes. I don't know if you ever did those.
Yep, I
used to love those, because I can do calculations really quickly in my head because I never used a calculator when I was young. And like nowadays, kids, like some of them can't even do like quick, multiplication tables because they use a calculator for everything.
Yeah.
So we're at NASA. I don't remember what year it happened, but when I guess NASA stopped getting so much money from the government, right? They quit sending, I guess, doing the launches or whatever, and they started moving towards like the private sector, right? So now you got obviously Elon Musk with SpaceX and Bezos with his company. What's your opinion on this shift? And I'm assuming it happened while you were working, right? When this started happening, from more now it's more like the government's working with these other companies, but now you do have the private sector having such a major influence on space programs.
Well, yeah. So I think the best way to look at it is, does the government make civilian planes?
No.
Exactly. But the government still is involved with the airport's infrastructure and the regulation of everything, right?
Of course.
So that's essentially the role that NASA needs to be moving towards, is instead of being responsible for all the research and the development and the implementation and the regulation for space travel, it becomes more of the infrastructure that allows other private companies to start commercializing spaceflight. So, for example, with the partnerships, as things did transition, it was a very, very rough time when that happened, because there was a plan as the shuttle was being retired to transition into a new program that had been set up by Bush called Constellation. And the idea was to keep the funding essentially the same and transition people from one program to the other. But then when that Constellation program was canceled, there was no funding to support. So a lot of people were getting just laid off. And we went through a period where on my contract, we had like around 1,400 people. And inside of 2 years, a year and a half-ish, we cut down to about 400 or 500 people.
Wow, that's a lot of people.
And it was like every 3 months was another layoff. And it was a stressful period, you know. So that was rough, but in the general transition into working with more private companies, it allows for faster growth, right? NASA is very much involved with the development of specifications for things. So, for example, with the International Space Station, a lot of the development was done between Russia and the United States. But with that, when you have things like the new international docking system, you now have, okay, well, if you're going to come up and bring cargo, you're going to come up and bring people, you need to conform to this new international dock. So they're working with SpaceX to do that. They're working with Boeing to do that. And even just recently, you've got a Russian supply vehicle up. You've got a Russian Soyuz transport craft up. You have the SpaceX cargo vehicle connected. You've got the SpaceX Crew transport up. And then you also have a Northrop Grumman Cygnus cargo vehicle connected. So you've got 5 different types of vehicles connected to the space station right now. And essentially it's turning into an airport hub in space, right? And with partnerships like Axiom, Axiom is actually going to be launching their own modules to expand off of the space station. So you'll be able to go up and visit Axiom because you'll have a fully set up infrastructure on the space station. And instead of them having to finance building out a station on their own, they can expand off an existing one. And once they get their infrastructure ready, detach. And now you have a second place in space independent of the International Space Station as a destination to go to. So it's good in terms of now you're creating industry that didn't quite exist before. You know, when it's all the government, you're limited by the rate of the government and a single path. When you have private sector, you've got competition,
right,
drive, and more innovation because there's not quite the same resources as the government, you know, unless you're Jeff Bezos.
or Elon Musk. They both got big money.
They both have big money, but their approaches are very different. Jeff Bezos is, I'm going to take $1 billion of stock every year, cash it out, finance Blue Origin. And that's what he's been doing for almost 20 years now. Elon came in the same time when he started Tesla, and he got $100 million and burned through almost all of it immediately. I think it was something like around $200,000 left between the first 3 launches. And it wasn't until the 4th launch when he was able to say, look, we did a successful launch. And then he was able to get some contract money from NASA to do more launches after that with the cargo program. And then came some more financing for the commercial crew program. And then they started getting satellite customers and actually building up a business inside of the SpaceX realm. So they had to risk it and say, okay, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we're going to try. And in that approach of, okay, we'll try something new so that we can save money in moving forward is how you end up things like reusability. How you end up with like Starship down in Boca Chica right now that's under development. If the Starship program goes through, Starship would basically revolutionize space travel as we know it, as an industry. Right now, one of the cheapest small rockets is the Electron rocket that's being built by a New Zealand company. And even then, that's still something like $15 million to get to space for 300 kilograms. Starship would be able to bring 100 tons into space for about $5 million.
Wow.
Just because of its reusability. So there's so much that's going to be happening with private industry, and I think it's, for me personally, I think it's a really good thing where we're moving towards, but the initial transition.
I mean, what is the goal just to keep going and going and going to Mars, or I mean, what's up with the moon? We haven't even touched that. Now they want to go to Mars. I guess is the attraction to Mars just because you can make it like you can create a habitat there? I mean, that's like the plan, right? To eventually convert it to some type of sustainability where people can go and live.
Well, the Mars and the moon represent two different challenges. There is a push to go to the moon. That was one thing with the Trump and Pence administration. They were like, "Wait, we want to try to get back to the moon by 2024," which would have been a good thing for Trump if he had won the second election, because then it would have been like, "Look, hey, this is what happened under my presidency." So it was a goal meant to be like a legacy item, right? And so far, the Biden administration hasn't tried to completely reverse that. That's one of the problems with politics is, whoever comes in tries to say, "Oh, I don't want to do what the previous guy was doing," but then they end up doing what the previous guy was doing anyway, but under their name,
right?
In a new timeline, and there's different delays and design issues and et cetera. So far, Biden's not trying to reverse what Trump was pushing for, but he just may not be moving as enthusiastically. So instead of 2024, it might be 2026 or so. But the first test launch for the system, Artemis 1, is going to be launching later on this year. They just completed the what we call a green run hot fire. And so they take the center stack with the fuel tanks and they run it for the full 8.5 minutes that it would be normally doing under a launch. And there's so much power that comes out of those liquid hydrogen engines that it actually creates clouds and rain.
Wow.
So people are like, "Is NASA testing changing the weather? How did it start raining?" But it's just the results of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen from the engines. But yeah, there's one goal to go to the moon, so that's where the government's moving at the moment. Elon wants to go to Mars. So he wants to put 1,000 starships into rotation to support that. He wants to do 1 million people on Mars within his lifetime. That's his big goal. Jeff Bezos wants more than 1 million people in low Earth orbit. He doesn't think that Mars is the right place to go. So he wants to create a sustainable item inside of low Earth orbit. And then there's other groups that want to go out to the asteroids.
When you say low Earth orbit, what is that?
Low Earth orbit is kind of like somewhere between under 200 miles or so.
Is that where like the satellites are or below the satellites?
There's satellites in low Earth orbit and there's satellites like even higher. Typically, it just depends on what the needs are for a satellite that determines its orbit height. When it's higher, it's typically when it's going to be something that's like geostationary, right? And then lower is going to be something that is moving around the Earth more.
So Bezos wants like kind of like what the space station is, just like a little city, but just floating around, basically. Because it's probably easier to attain as well than going to Mars, right?
Yeah, we'll have to see. There's different challenges with each objective, right? There's another company called the Gateway Foundation, and they want to set up a hotel that is in a different type of orbit that's always facing the sun.
Oh, okay.
And they want theirs to actually be a rotating station, kind of like from the sci-fi novels and movies, that creates an artificial gravity. And they want to be able to start with having 400 people go up to their space station.
Wow, all these things, man, they sound so like about time, right? Like, I mean, I just remember, when you're young and you're watching these sci-fi movies, and like the year is like 2022 or 2020, and you got the flying cars and all this craziness, and you ask yourself, what's going on here? Like, we were supposed to already be at Mars. We were supposed to do this, but I guess people just never really understood the challenges that you had to overcome to get to those levels, right? Like it's not easy stuff. This is groundbreaking things, when they do happen.
Absolutely. There's the combination of the technology and then also the economic push, right?
Right. It's not free.
What makes something viable and attainable, right? Like there's if it cost $1 million to fly, no one's going to take a plane.
Mm-hmm.
But when a flight cost, $100, $200 and, to get to another city and back, then planes are much more viable option. So you're willing to do that. The first set of space tourism is going to be very expensive. Right now, SpaceX is charging like $58 million a seat on the Dragon to get up to the space station. That's how much they're charging NASA. The average person's not going to be able to do that, even if they saved all of their money in their life, right?
Right.
Eventually, that's going to get down to, hey, $20,000 to go to the moon. That means, hey, we could actually do a honeymoon on the moon, right?
Yeah.
That's something more attainable than when it's an exclusive item. And so when it becomes more attainable, that creates more of a drive. And the more of the drive that's there, the more industry that's going to revolve around that. Like it's going to draw in more competition. It's going to draw in more supplies, and that's going to further bring in the price to make it cheaper. And eventually it'll bottom out to something that actually becomes, like a standard. But there has to be that push that says, hey, we need to make flying cars a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Like someone has to say, I really want to do these flying cars. And if someone doesn't do that, then the technology will always be, something exclusive and exist only in fairy tales.
Yeah, it's very true. And the last thing we can talk about is the COVID effect, right? It's been a year, right, since all this we went on this lockdown. How has COVID affected you? I think we talked a little bit earlier. You were telling me you've been working from home since February. Not just the work thing, but talk a little bit about like your mental state. Like, obviously practicing social distancing and not spending as much time as you normally would with your friends and loved ones. Well, how have you handled that, and what have you done to kind of cope with it?
I think I'm in one of the rare, unique situations where this kind of happened at a good point in my life. I had begun feeling very overwhelmed socially, and even when I just bought a new house, and I was saying how I just want to be able to take a few weeks to just be at home and not do anything. If I need to do vacation, and the vacation ended up not working out the way I wanted to, and some other stuff came out. So I was disappointed after that time had come, and I didn't get to spend time alone at home. And then it's like, all right, we're going to be working from home. Oh, we're working from home. And everyone needs to social distance. Oh, you mean I have a good excuse to tell people not to bother me?
Wow, you got your wish come true, huh?
I'm sorry, world. This is all my fault. I'm sorry everyone else had to deal with it as well. But I prayed for a lockdown, and
and you wanted a year? That's what you wanted?
I think after about a year, I guess we're good. But no, for the most part, I've been fine. My father always jokes around, like when he's talking with my mother, that she gets concerned, and she's like, okay, well, I need to go check on my baby. And he's like, your son is fine. Mm-hmm. He's not lonely. He's just alone.
There's a difference. Yeah.
And I've been doing tons of projects at home and building out my wood workshop in the garage, and really just taking time to relax and enjoy, peace and quiet. Prior to that, I've had 11 different people live in my last house in the course of like 5 years. I was a touring poet on a competitive slam team. And so during the slam season, there were time periods where I was hitting multiple cities inside of a week while still doing a 40-hour-a-week job at NASA. Drive out to clean, perform, come back, drive out to Austin the next night, perform, come back, drive out to San
Wow.
Antonio, perform, come back, drive to New Orleans on the weekend, perform, come back. And so doing that for years and years, it's been nice to just say, okay, I don't have to push to do anything. I don't have to try to squeeze XYZ into this particular set of time. I can just relax and take my time with everything. There's no deadlines. There's no pressure. And for me, it's just been great. Like it's the vacation I needed.
Well, that's good, man. I mean, that generally isn't the response that I get from people. People, they miss this aspect of it, they miss, the socializing, or just having some activity that they like doing that's been taken away. But there are, the occasions, the rare occasions like yourself, people who just needed that, who just needed their alone time, who just needed to, like you said, not have being pulled in so many directions. You can kind of just focus on yourself and the projects that you got going on. So it's good. It's definitely very good, man. I know, like you said, got a lot of projects going on. So I know you got stuff to do today. I really appreciate you taking time and coming over. Hadn't seen you in a while, so it's always good to sit down and have a chat. And I mean, we definitely, when things get a little bit back to normal, I've been to your house once. You got a nice house, go hang out or something, catch up again. And again, man, I really enjoy it, man. Thanks for coming on.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jeremyah Payne. You have a good one, folks.